Writing in Vox this August, Joshua Keating observes North Korea trading weapons to Russia. That single move bypassed years of American isolation, turning Pyongyang's nuclear program into a permanent reality Washington can no longer negotiate away. Just days later, in the Atlantic, Robert Kagan describes Iran pulling off a remarkably similar feat. By tightening its grip on global energy shipping, Tehran has called a military bluff and forced neighboring nations to accept its dominance. Reading these pieces together reveals something striking. Two very different adversaries have survived decades of threats to build a new, untouchable status, leaving the United States staring down a sudden lack of good options. Writing just last week, Joshua Keating looks at the sudden push to restart talks between Washington and Pyongyang. Notice how Keating tracks a massive shift in leverage. Because North Korea bypassed American isolation by trading weapons to Russia, its nuclear program is now a permanent reality. Listen for the specific detail about North Korean diplomats quietly rejecting personal letters from the White House. They are wealthier, more secure, and no longer need a diplomatic breakthrough.
Can President Donald Trump pen a new chapter in his love story with North Korea's Kim Jong Un? Why Trump can't rekindle the spark with Kim Jong Un? The president badly wants a meeting with the North Korean leader, but it's not clear what they have to talk about. In Trump's first term, the two leaders, in Trump's words, fell in love after exchanging letters and held 3 historic meetings, but failed to make much progress toward the goal of denuclearizing the heavily armed hermit state. Now, Trump appears to be trying to recapture the magic, reportedly urging aides to set up a meeting with Kim as soon as this fall. This news comes soon after Trump's Truth Social post on Sunday announcing he had ordered the U.S. military to substantially reduce joint military exercises with ally South Korea, in part because it would send a signal that is totally inappropriate and hostile to a country that, as long as Donald J. Trump has been president, has been unthreatening and respectful: North Korea. Key takeaways. Trump is trying to restart talks with North Korea's Kim Jong Un, scaling back a planned joint military exercise with South Korea, and instructing aides to prioritize setting up a new meeting. Trump's 3 historic meetings with Kim were a diplomatic high point of his first term, but since Trump returned to office, the North Koreans have been rebuffing American advances. Much has changed in North Korea since the last time the two met. The country is wealthier, less isolated, and more militarily secure. A Trump meeting might not have the same appeal it once did. Trump has claimed, without elaborating, that Kim has responded to this overture, but there's been no public response from Pyongyang yet. Trump's outreach didn't come entirely out of nowhere.
Trump has made clear since the beginning of his term that he would like to meet with Kim again, and there was speculation that a meeting might happen when Trump traveled to South Korea for a summit last fall. North Korea's UN mission in New York has also rebuffed several attempts by U.S. officials to deliver a personal letter from Trump seeking to restart dialogue. In the midst of an unpopular conflict with Iran that seems unlikely to end in anything resembling a victory, it makes sense that Trump might be reaching back to what he sees as one of the foreign policy high points of his first term. Kim Jong Un has always treated me with great respect, Trump told reporters on Monday. I understand him. He understands me. Beyond reconnecting with an old friend, it's not entirely clear what Trump actually wants out of North Korea. But if his goal is a new diplomatic breakthrough, that will be even harder than it was the first time. The country is a much different place than it was the last time the two leaders sat down. And even if they were to meet again, Kim seems even less likely to make real concessions. Like it or not, North Korea is a nuclear power now. Analysts believe North Korea possesses around 50 nuclear weapons, with enough fissile material to build 40 more. It has missiles that are theoretically capable of reaching the U.S. mainland. There was a time when the North Koreans were willing to at least discuss giving up their program in exchange for sanctions relief and major concessions on U.S. military support to South Korea. But that time is probably over, partly thanks to Trump's own actions. There is no chance that North Korea is going to denuclearize. Zero chance, said Joseph Yoon, a veteran U.S. North Korea negotiator who recently served as acting U.S. ambassador to South Korea. They have seen what happened to Iran. They have seen what happened to Ukraine. The way they see it, their nuclear weapons are what protects them. Last year, the country's official news agency dismissed denuclearization as an unrealizable pipe dream. On top of that, North Korea is in a much stronger negotiating position than it was the last time these two leaders met for a photo op. It's a very different North Korea now. It's stronger geopolitically, and Kim is stronger domestically. Jung Pak served as U.S. Special Representative for North Korea in the Biden administration. In 2018, North Korea was heavily isolated and struggling under an international sanctions regime, which was, at least officially, if not always in practice, supported by China and Russia, as well as the United States. For a young leader still looking to establish his internal legitimacy and international standing, a meeting with the sitting U.S. president was a major coup. But things improved dramatically for North Korea after the pandemic. After it began lifting its COVID-era lockdown, one of the toughest in the world, North Korea has become what the Wall Street Journal has called the world's most unlikely growth story. The country's economy has grown for 3 straight years, and while it's still an impoverished country where nearly half the population is malnourished, Pyongyang is by all accounts booming, with thousands of new homes built, along with a surge in Western-style restaurants and ride-hailing apps.
North Korea emerged from the pandemic stronger, despite the odds, said Jong Pak, who served as U.S. Special Representative for North Korea in the Biden administration. It's a very different North Korea now. It's stronger geopolitically, and Kim is stronger domestically. North Korea has been one of the main beneficiaries of the war in Ukraine, sending thousands of soldiers and munitions to help the Russian war effort. While thousands of those troops have died, the North Korean regime has gained billions of dollars in revenue and military aid from Russia in response, as well as invaluable battlefield experience for its commanders and weapon systems. Russian President Vladimir Putin has come through for the North Koreans in other ways. In 2024, Russia vetoed the mandate of the UN body that monitored the enforcement of international sanctions on North Korea, effectively shredding the international sanctions regime. In 2025, trade between North Korea and China, its main economic partner, rose 25%. The regime has found other innovative ways of raising revenue, reportedly netting billions through cybercrime targeted at foreign banks and cryptocurrency exchanges. Kim is also less desperate for legitimacy these days. In September 2025, he stood alongside Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin at a massive military parade in Beijing, a powerful demonstration of unity among 3 U.S. adversaries. These days, Kim likely feels he's the one being wooed. Xi's high-profile trip to Pyongyang in June was interpreted by many as a sign that China, warily eyeing the increasingly close relationship between Russia and North Korea, was looking to shore up its ties with its longtime ally.
Domestically, when the world's first millennial dictator took power after his father died in 2011, many wondered how long he would last. Today, he's feeling secure enough to be thinking about long-term handoff plans, publicly positioning his 13-year-old daughter as his future successor. Kim is clearly not desperate to meet with Trump, and these days the United States has fewer means to pressure him. Without Chinese and Russian support, the U.S. can only dial up international sanctions so much. As for military pressure, the U.S. has been moving military assets out of the Korean peninsula to the Middle East and recently redeployed its last aircraft carrier out of Asia. As Trump's actions this week demonstrate, he's not all that interested in working with U.S. allies in the region to pressure the North Koreans. But if he were considering pairing his warm overtures to Kim with a stick, a fire and fury threat wouldn't pack the same punch today. Is there any reason for new U.S.-North Korea talks? Still, there are reasons Kim might want to sit down with Trump again. North Korea would still like U.S. sanctions lifted. Kim's influential sister has stated that the regime is looking for the U.S. to formally accept its status as a nuclear power, as Russia has now done. Former U.S. State Department North Korean negotiator Joel Witt suspects that given Trump's desperation for talks, Pyongyang might try to press its advantage even further. If I was a North Korean, I would ask the United States for what I would call a peace agenda, he said. That would mean more than just reducing the size of U.S.-South Korean exercises. It could include cutting back on U.S. troops in South Korea or even Guam. Trump, who has repeatedly, including in his recent Truth Social post, made clear that he sees the U.S. military presence in South Korea as a waste, and the South Koreans as coddled, wealthy freeloaders, might be amenable to concessions like this. But what could the U.S. get out of talking to North Korea if denuclearization is off the table? Some analysts have suggested a limited deal might be possible, which could see North Korea dismantle its reactors or some of its centrifuges, slowing down the growth of its nuclear program, if not eliminating it. Pak also noted that given North Korea's refusal to engage in nearly any diplomacy with the U.S. since 2019, just holding talks and building some confidence between the two sides would be progress. The meeting itself would be the win, Pak said. On the other hand, holding talks that do not explicitly aim at eliminating North Korea's nuclear program would be seen as effectively accepting that North Korea is a nuclear power now. At this point, there's a strong realist case to be made for accepting North Korea's nuclear status and proceeding from there, but it's hard to square with the administration's stance on Iran's nuclear program. It's also likely that the kind of incremental concessions North Korea might, in the best of circumstances, be willing to offer would not satisfy a U.S. president with a penchant for grand bargains. In his first term, just the fact that Trump and Kim sat down made history. Now that that's been accomplished, they may find that, like many a romance a few years in, they've run out of things to talk about.
Joshua Keating leaves you looking at a North Korea that simply waited Washington out. By trading weapons to Russia and cementing its nuclear program, Kim Jong Un made American isolation irrelevant. Turning to Robert Kagan's piece on Iran, you watch a similar survival act play out, but with a much sharper edge. North Korea secured its status by building a bomb and ignoring the outside world. Kagan shows Iran doing something entirely different, surviving direct American and Israeli military strikes by holding the global energy supply hostage. Notice how both writers expose the exact same limit to American power. Keating points out that North Korea's new wealth makes diplomatic overtures useless. Kagan takes that premise a step further. He argues that when Iran attacked Qatar's gas facilities, it proved it could crash the global economy at any moment, forcing the United States to blink first and call off its strikes. Put these two situations together, and the picture changes. You stop seeing isolated states struggling to survive American pressure, and start seeing adversaries who realize Washington has finally run out of moves.
Iran unleashed. The dominant power in the Middle East from now on will not be the U.S. or Israel, but Iran. For years, Iran confronted a balance of power in the Middle East that tilted against it. The region was dominated by a hostile American superpower, a nuclear-armed and militarily superior Israel, and significant local actors, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, that were strategically and economically aligned with the United States. Today finds Iran in entirely new circumstances. It has gone head-to-head with the superpower and Israel, withstood a pounding from their most advanced weapons, and more than survived. As a result, Iran has, with American help, completely reconfigured the power structure of the Middle East and the Persian Gulf. The dominant power in the region going forward will be Iran, not the U.S. or Israel. Neighboring countries are already making their adjustments to this new reality. More distant powers will too. For years, the world has been dealing with an Iran constrained. It will now discover what Iran unleashed looks like. Iran doesn't need a deal with the United States. The common assumption that a weak and impoverished Iran would eventually have to make some accommodation to American power, open the Strait of Hormuz, and set about tending to its badly damaged economy has proved mistaken. The Islamic Republic has rarely appeared weaker or more vulnerable than it has over the past 2 years. Last February, President Trump renewed his maximum pressure campaign of international sanctions, which severely damaged Iran's already weak economy and cut billions of dollars in state revenues. Israel and the United States then launched the 12-day war that June to destroy Iranian nuclear facilities. The war significantly damaged Iran's program and revealed just how vulnerable the country was to Israeli and American strikes. Then, in February, the United States and Israel launched the most recent war with the killing of the regime's supreme leader and the great majority of its senior officials, followed by more than 5 weeks of unremitting attacks on Iranian military capabilities. Yet through all of this, the regime has survived and made no concessions. On the contrary, Iran exposed America's Achilles heel, the vulnerability of Iran's neighbors. A major turning point came in mid-March when Israel attacked Iran's South Pars gas field, and Iran retaliated against Qatar's Ras Laffan complex, the world's largest liquefied natural gas facility. The attack showed that although Iran obviously could not defeat the United States in an air war, Iranian missiles and drones could inflict enough damage on the oil and gas infrastructure of the Gulf to plunge the world into a prolonged economic crisis. The Gulf states understood this immediately, and so did Trump. He halted attacks on Iranian energy targets, ordered a reluctant Israel to do the same, and soon brought the larger campaign to a stop without extracting a single Iranian concession. Ever since, and despite many threats, Trump has not once ordered another strike against Iranian energy infrastructure. This alone was enough to alter the balance of leverage between Iran and the United States. From April through last month, Trump repeatedly threatened to launch another massive attack against Iran. Each time Iran threatened retaliation, Gulf states warned of the consequences, and Trump backed off.
By his third or fourth bluff, Tehran had reason to conclude that the United States was no longer prepared to follow Iran up the ladder of escalation. Trump made this clear when he noted in mid-June that continuing the war would lead to economic catastrophe, possibly even a depression, and that he did not want to become President Herbert Hoover. Ever since, Trump has been trying, with notable desperation, to end the conflict. The Memorandum of Understanding that the U.S. and Iran adopted in June reflected this reality. Although phrased to save face for the United States as much as possible, the MOU was a clear Iranian victory. It declared that the Islamic Republic of Iran, and no other nation, would make arrangements for the safe passage of commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. In dialogue with Oman, without intermediaries or other participants, Iran would determine the Strait's administration in line with the applicable international law and the sovereign rights of coastal states. The MOU did not call for a return to the pre-war status quo. Neither did it provide the United States any say over future administration of the Strait. Rather, it designated Iran as the only actor other than the weak Oman, and it even allowed Iran to charge nations for safe passage after 60 days. The MOU thus codified the defeat that the United States had suffered back in March, when Trump apparently realized that he either could not or would not risk further attacks on energy facilities in the region. In retrospect, Iran's leaders do not seem to have believed that they needed the MOU. Supreme Leader Moshtaba Khamenei reportedly had to be persuaded by President Masoud Pezeshkian to sign it.
Tehran's relative indifference was understandable. The American concessions reflected such desperation to end the war that the Iranians could well have expected that the U.S. would eventually retreat, with or without a deal. Iranian leaders certainly did not hesitate to blow up the ceasefire almost immediately when the U.S. Navy began shepherding tankers through the Omani side of the strait. Trump may or may not have understood the full extent of the concessions his negotiators had made regarding control of the strait, but from the Iranian point of view, the Omani route was an attempt to recapture what the U.S. had given away. For a while, the United States and Iran engaged in tit-for-tat strikes, culminating in intense American attacks in mid-July. When these had no effect, Trump warned on July 15th that the United States was going to knock out all their power plants and all their bridges unless Iran negotiated. Yet again, no attack followed. Then the world, and the Iranians, learned one of the main reasons. Revelations that American stocks of crucial munitions were dangerously low, and that no less than the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff himself was looking for an off-ramp, sent a clear signal about the future course of American strategy. A major assault on Iran would threaten American interests elsewhere by weakening the United States in the possible event of a Chinese move on Taiwan or a Russian onslaught against a NATO member. Missile shortages would also increase the hazards involved in a massive attack on Iranian infrastructure. The U.S. would be forced to send more manned aircraft within range of Iranian air defenses, and it would have relatively few interceptors on hand to protect the Gulf states and its own regional bases. The risk of American casualties would be high, as would the danger to the region's energy infrastructure, and nothing would guarantee that such an assault would be any more effective than the 5+ weeks of bombings were earlier this year. American actions have made plain that Washington fears escalation more than Iran does, not just for now, but for the future. This places limits on what the United States can do even at low levels of conflict. Because any military action against Iran risks stepping onto an escalation ladder that the U.S. does not want to ascend, even tit-for-tat strikes seem no longer to be part of American strategy. The president has reportedly told his advisors that he does not want to order more strikes. The Iranians have struck at several UAE ships this month and even fired ballistic missiles at the country, but the United States has not responded since July, a fact undoubtedly noted by the UAE and Iran's other neighbors. Given the evident American reluctance to fight another major campaign, Iran has reason to wonder what it can get from a deal that it will not get anyway without one. Senior Iranian officials are now calling for the withdrawal of American forces, the lifting of the American naval blockade and all sanctions, the freeing of Iran's frozen assets, and the payment of war reparations. The conventional wisdom is that Iran's leaders know that these demands are non-starters for Washington, and that they are therefore either rubbing Trump's nose in defeat, angling for a better deal, or overplaying their hand. Many observers still assume that control of the strait is a bargaining chip to squeeze more concessions out of the United States or get Trump back to the MOU, but we are well past all that.
A victor does not have to go back to the bargaining table except to set the terms of surrender. Iran has now laid out those terms. They may appear maximalist and excessive, but Tehran must hardly believe that it has reason to ask for less. Iran has made clear for months that control of the strait is not negotiable. The notion, constantly floated by the Trump administration and the media, that the Iranians can't make up their minds and that they keep shifting their positions, is nonsense. As far back as April, Mojtaba declared that Iran would implement new legal frameworks and management of the strait, and that foreigners who come from thousands of kilometers away had no place in the Gulf, except at the bottom of its waters. On a day commemorating Iran's defeat of Portugal in the strait in 1622, he declared that by the will and power of God, the bright future of the Persian Gulf region will be a future without America. The idea that, having survived both military strikes and sanctions, Iran will now succumb to sanctions alone is deluded. Mojtaba has overhauled Iran's national security leadership and installed veterans of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in top positions. Former IRGC commander Mohsen Rezai now heads the Supreme National Security Council, and other hardline security officials have been elevated. The regime emerging from the war is being reorganized by men who believe that Iran survived an American-Israeli attempt to destroy it, and that defiance, not compromise, produced victory. But this is not just triumphalism. For Iran, control of the strait is neither a luxury nor a bargaining chip.
Given the likelihood that at some future point, Israel or the United States will attack again, deal or no deal, the strait provides Iran's strongest and surest deterrent. It is also the key to unlocking many of the shackles that a U.S.-dominated world order placed on Iran over the course of decades, and to undoing a regional and global economic system designed to exclude and impoverish it. Some so-called moderates within the Iranian establishment may well regard the strait as a bargaining chip, but they are not winning the argument, for reasons that are not hard to understand. An IRGC spokesperson stated the regime's perspective plainly. For us, the Strait of Hormuz is not merely an economic waterway, but rather a key component of our geopolitical and strategic power. Iran has been establishing the mechanisms of control for months and instructing shipowners and nations as to how the system will operate. It created the Persian Gulf Strait Authority and demanded that shipping companies register with it, obtain permits, follow Iran-designated routes, and pay for Iran-provided insurance and security. Neither is Iran claiming merely the right to collect money. It is also claiming the right to decide who may pass. It has proposed excluding vessels associated with governments it deems hostile, such as the U.S. and Israel, and it has demanded compensation from nations that participated in attacks against it.
Iran is establishing the principle that passage through the strait will henceforth be a privilege that Tehran can grant, condition, delay, or deny. Other nations have already begun acquiescing to the new arrangement. India, Pakistan, Iraq, Turkey, China, and others have sought to come to terms.
Iran's control of the Strait of Hormuz is a more useful instrument of power than a nuclear weapon would be. A nuclear weapon might deter an attack, but control of the strait gives Iran leverage every day over dozens of countries. With it, Iran can reward friends, punish enemies, extract revenue, force the loosening of sanctions, and make governments think twice before opposing Iranian policies. It can do all of this without firing a shot, and while preserving the ability to threaten violence when necessary. The sanction strategy that for decades served to isolate Iran rested on international cooperation. Nations that depend on access to the strait, Japan and South Korea, for example, will have to choose between access to a reliable energy supply and participation in American-backed sanctions. Will they choose solidarity with Washington, this Washington, over their economic interests? In the new order that Iran is creating, a global sanctions regime is likely to be unsustainable. Iran will probably sustain its control over energy flows for at least a couple of years. The most optimistic projections suggest that establishing alternative pipelines and export routes that circumvent the Strait of Hormuz will take this long. But one wonders whether these will even come to fruition. New pipelines, ports, and energy facilities will be just as vulnerable to Iranian missiles and drones as the old ones were. Will Iran simply stand by while neighboring states construct the means to escape its control? The small states that must build and protect such routes are going to be wary of incurring Iran's wrath, and American protection has proved inadequate. Iran is already trying to draw Iraq away from developing alternative oil export corridors, in part by offering safe passage for Iraqi tankers on Iranian terms. The regional adjustment has begun. Gulf rulers who once counted on an American security guarantee must now make their peace with the power that proved capable of defeating their protector. Saudi Arabia's rejection of the U.S. and Israel-backed Abraham Accords in favor of a strategic compact with Pakistan and Turkey hints at the shape of the future. The Abraham Accords represented the consolidation of Israeli power and influence in the region and the further containment of Iran. The Mecca Pact is something else entirely. Neither Pakistan nor Turkey regards Iran as a major threat. Pakistan, like Iran, has close relations with China. Israel regards Turkey as a regional threat second only to Iran. Instead of an American-Israeli order, this will be an alignment less implacably hostile to Iran, less friendly to Israel, and more independent of the United States. The signatories also have nuclear weapons in common. Pakistan has them, and the Turks and Saudis want them. Meanwhile, Iran will be free to resume its own nuclear weapons program without fear of another major attack. This fact in itself will transform the regional balance. Last year, Israel and the United States bombed Iran's nuclear facilities for 12 days without facing serious Iranian retaliation. Now Iran has been emboldened to use its control of the strait and threats against neighboring states and their energy infrastructure to deter any such strikes for the foreseeable future. American missile and interceptor stocks will take a long time to replenish and may well be needed in other parts of the world in years to come. Iran will all the while be rearming with Russian and Chinese help, potentially leaving the U.S. in a worse position a year from now than it is in today. The effects will extend far beyond the Middle East. American allies in Asia and Europe can see that a relatively brief war against a second-rank power has consumed much of America's supply of the weapons needed for missile defense. They can see that the United States began a war it could not finish, exposed its partners to retaliation, and then stopped when the costs became too great. Beijing's conclusions about Taiwan and Moscow's conclusions about Europe may be impossible to know. But America's allies will inevitably be asking whether Washington has the weapons, stamina, and political will to sustain another major conflict. In fact, they already are. That the Iranian regime could fall is, of course, possible. It is corrupt, repressive, economically incompetent, and widely hated by its people. But it had all of these weaknesses before the war.
What it did not have was control of the world's most important energy choke point, the prospect of growing revenues and influence, the demonstrated ability to deter the United States, and the prestige of an impossible victory. A regime that survived what much of the world believed would destroy it, and then force the world's dominant power to retreat, will likely emerge strengthened, at least for a time. Such success tends to breed confidence, and perhaps overconfidence, but it is not likely to make Iran's leaders less ambitious or less committed to the faith that saw them through this miraculous triumph.
Recently, senior Iranian officials began talking publicly about adopting a fully offensive posture, and reports have emerged of Iranian plans to expand its targets to include European countries hosting American bases. To see stories in the New York Times asking who will blink first is amusing, given that the Iranians until now have never once blinked, while the Trump administration has done nothing but blink. Iran may even start fighting again to force the U.S. to lift the naval blockade. Given the American administration's proven fear of escalation, the hope is not unreasonable. The world has spent decades worrying about what Iran might do if it acquired a nuclear weapon. It should now worry about something even more consequential. An Iran that has defeated the United States, no longer fears American attack, and controls access to the Persian Gulf. Nuclear weapons alone could never have given Iran this kind of power. The failed U.S. and Israeli war with Iran has.
Years of embargoes and aircraft carriers parked offshore were supposed to force a surrender. Instead, that isolation acted like a forge. Constant pressure just taught these governments how to survive without the West, pushing them to find new allies and new ways to hold global trade hostage. Now, the old levers of power are pulling at thin air. The standoff has hardened into something permanent. The question left behind is simple. When the threat of force and the squeeze of sanctions no longer make a rival blink, what exactly is left to try?